Alright guys, when we last saw our Anglo-Saxon Warlord, he looked like this. All I've done is use some Formin P3 primer, sprayed him down good. Now, inevitably with spray primer you're going to miss some spots, so I just used this Vallejo black paint to go back and touch up the areas that were lightly sprayed or missed. It's usually on the undersides of the figure. So just take a minute and touch him up real quick, just making sure don't leave any bare metal, just get everything covered, make him nice and black all over, and he's ready to get started painting. First we'll do the chainmail. We'll start with this Vallejo gunmetal gray, give the chainmail a good coverage, then we'll come back and wash it with this Nuln oil. Here I'm using Citadel's standard brush. To paint this fellow I also use Citadel's detail brush and Foundry's fine detail brush. Next just grab Vallejo leather brown to paint the base of the figure. Doing this now because we're going to have to wait about 15 minutes or so for that wash to dry. So might as well get something else done while we're waiting. So we'll complete painting the base and make sure we're giving the Nuln oil wash enough time to dry. We'll take this Vallejo natural steel and dry brush the mail only in a downward direction. You can now use Foundry metal to give the most exposed raised areas of the mail a nice highlight. Next I grab Citadel's DACA red and first layer of paint on the stockings. Next, use Vallejo flat red for the second coat of paint on the stockings. I'm going pretty much complete coverage here because there's no real muscle definition or anything in the legs. So pretty much complete coverage. Just leave a little bit of the DACA red, the first coat of paint, exposed at the top and bottom of the legging. The highlight on the legging is Vallejo scarlet. Just leave a little bit of the flat red exposed above and below. But make sure to get good coverage on the middle part of the legging with the scarlet. Next to the shoes, for them we'll use the Foundry buff leather triad. Covered these paints before in previous videos, but just to reiterate, Foundry's triads come in the same color in 3 shades. In this case it's buff leather shade, which is the darkest, then buff leather light, which is the lightest. So we'll just start painting, and with all the triads from here on to be the same thing. We'll just start painting from darkest to the lightest in 3 layers, and with each layer leaving a bit of the previous layer exposed, and gives you a nice natural layering or highlight effect. Now for the second coat, or the middle layer, of Foundry buff leather 7B. Now for the third layer, buff leather light 7C. Also, the more astute among you will have noticed that I have switched to Foundry's fine detail brush. The outline along the top of these shoes was a little harder to find on this sculpt. Once I got the paint on it, it became a little more clear. So now I'm going back and touching up with DACA red on the top of the stocking there to get a nice clean line. Next is the tunic. For that, using Foundry's Bavarian Cornflower Blue Triad. Now, as hard as it may be to believe for you rabid Trojan Art painting fans out there, did make a slight error here. Yeah, I know, happens. Should have painted the flesh first, because I should have painted the flesh before I painted the sleeves. But I realized that after I'd already started painting the tunic. So what I'm going to do here, I'm just going to go ahead and finish the bottom of the tunic. Then I'll have to go do the flesh. Then I'll have to switch back to the blue and do the sleeves. So things are got a bit out of order here, but hey, it happens. Now for the flesh, I'm going to use Foundry's Flesh Triad. But before I put that on, I'm going to put a layer of this Reaper Master Series Antique Rose on to kind of smooth the transition between the black primer and the first coat of flesh shade. Okay, now for the Foundry Flesh Triad. With the flesh shade, you want almost complete coverage, except for the most recessed areas and the edges of the flesh. You want to leave the antique rose showing on such areas as the eye sockets, like I said, around the edges, and also like in between the fingers. Now for the middle shade of the flesh. Now the light shade of the flesh. You want to be careful not to overdo the light flesh. You want to just hit the ridge of the nose, the cheekbones, the top of the hands, and highlight the finger slightly, and then the fingertips on the sword. Don't overdo it. You'll end up making your guy look too pale. Okay, so that's it for the flesh. Next we have to go back to our blue triad again and do the sleeves. And now I got the Vallejo chocolate brown. I'm going to put a gold trim around the bottom trim of the tunic and around the cuffs of the tunic. And for gold, I always use brown as an undercoat. Seems I use gray for an undercoat for silver. So we'll start off by putting a strip of the chocolate brown in the areas where we're going to apply the gold. Now I use foundry burning gold to paint the gold trim on the tunic. Now back to Citadel Wazdaka Red once again to touch up the top edge of the leggings underneath the tunic. Now I've got Vallejo flat brown. Now I'm going to paint a lot of things with this. I'm going to paint the edging of the mail, the leather trim around the mail. I'm going to paint his equipment, his straps, his belt, his sword sheaths, and the undercoats for the gold for the swords, the sword hilts. Also going to paint his hair and his helmet this color as an undercoat. During this step we'll also do the base coat for the back of the shield, and don't forget the eyebrows. Now to highlight the leather trim and equipment using foundry deep brown leather triad. Now foundry burning gold for the fittings on the equipment and the sword hilts and the helmet. Now to finish up the hair, first color I'm going to use here on top of the brown is Vallejo red leather. I'm going to leave some of the brown showing through on the deepest, most recessed areas and the undersides. Next color is Vallejo orange brown. Just paint this along the most raised areas of the hair. Now for the final highlight on the hair, mixed Vallejo orange brown with Vallejo ivory and hit the highlights, and then mixed it again with a little bit more ivory for the final highlight, and the hair's done. Now for the eyes, use Vallejo black gray and fine detail brush, and just go in there and make a little tiny little almond shape at each eye. Don't overdo it here. You don't want Google eyes. Now using Vallejo ivory, go in and paint the whites of the eyes. You just need a little dot on either side, or just paint the entire center of the black almond white, but leave the black border. If you try to paint either side, if you mess that up, you can always go back and retouch the black in the center like I'm doing here. And finally for the eyes, you can take your medium flesh shade and go back and touch up around the edges of the black to clean everything up nice and pretty. Next, use the Foundry Spear Shaft Triad to paint the back of the shield. Next, Vallejo gunmetal gray on the shield boss. Highlight that with Foundry medium metal. Now I'm using Vallejo dark gray for the sword blade. Then Foundry medium metal for the second layer on the sword blade. Now I'm using Foundry forest green shade for the front of the shield base coat. Now I'm doing the shield in the same colors and pattern as I did the shield for the one Irish champion a couple videos back. The guys are going two different places, so it doesn't matter that the shields match. And I just wanted to try that same color combination and pattern again, so that's why you're seeing the same thing again. I know it doesn't help much on a how-to video, but there'll be plenty of more shield patterns in later videos. Now I'm using the Foundry Ochre Triad to do the pattern on the shield. And finally, Foundry medium forest green to highlight the green on the shield. And there he is, ain't he pretty?